But speaking of, Amazon came out, of course, with their basically State of the Union last week as well, which is always an interesting read. I think one thing that Amazon probably does better than any other company is state what they stand for and provide clear guidance on what they're actually trying to do, and without using quite as much buzzwordery as everybody else. And so I know you took a look at this as well. I mean, we all read it, right? Because it's an important piece.
So yeah. First of all, I'm a huge fan of Andy Jassy. I was so excited, surprised, frankly, when he was promoted from AWS to head Amazon overall. But
Mhm.
clearly, a sign at the time of the importance of AWS to Amazon's overall strategy. But to me, actually, I mean, there's the kind of the substance of what he said from it as it applies to Amazon specifically. But I actually thought that to me the biggest takeaway, the biggest thing that was important in it is it's almost a blueprint for CIOs to follow. So, I mean, if I can be reductive and sort of boil this down, they're basically his basic statement was that Amazon's focusing on two things: AI and efficiency. And I
Mhm.
love it because it's sort of with all the hype about AI, we sort of forget that we still have businesses to run and we still have to be executing. And so, he spent a lot of time talking about the need for continuing to drive costs down, but doing things in these, in my opinion, very smart ways. Things like, using technology and using data to identify how they can move warehouses ever closer to customers, which not only improves efficiency, reduces cost, but actually improves the customer experience. And I believe that that's one of those things that's always that benchmark that you always need to be looking, and you're getting it right when you're sort of doing this, right? And
Mhm.
so this idea of leveraging technology, but also focusing on the business blocking and tackling, I think that's where every CIO needs to be right now. It's like you need to be looking at both sides of this, how you're evaluating AI and how you're evaluating any emerging technology, but always in the context of your blocking and tackling the
Mhm.
fundamentals of your business. And then specifically on the AI side, he identified sort of three things that was their focus. And again, to your point, I love that they're always so crystal clear on what they're doing, which we'll juxtapose with Google in a minute here.
Yes.
But he basically said it's three things: it's about models, apps, and chips. And what I thought was really fascinating is I looked at that and said, if I'm a CIO and I'm trying to figure out, going back to what we just talked about with OpenAI, right? How I'm placing, where I'm placing my bets when it comes to AI. I think it's a great framework, right? You need to be looking at the efficacy of the models themselves, we're talking about foundational models and frontier models, and where all that fits and what's useful for you. And that's where the whole the RAG piece of it kind of fits in, where it's
Mhm.
like understanding how you're going to connect the dots, understanding, we've talked about this before, AI apps are the apps that you're going to build on top of those foundational models, right? How you're going to then activate this AI, and then understanding chips, which is ultimately going to come down to two things: performance and cost efficiency, mostly driven by power. And so, looking at that through that lens, I think it helps take something that is very hard for a CIO to kind of get their head around, as far as how I'm placing a bet with an AI partner, and
Mhm.
now have a framework to evaluate it. And so I think, I'm always been a huge, huge fan of how they approach the market, and this just solidified it more.
Yeah, and I also liked how Amazon brought up this idea of primitives. Basically, what are our foundational technologies? What are our Lego building blocks that we are trying to build everything else on top of? They want to start with basics and move from there and figure out which basics are most important to them at this point, which is part of why Amazon is working on chips. They realize that at the level of technology that they are working on, having control of their CPUs to some extent and their training compute capabilities is an important piece of their puzzle. It's not necessarily something you would build in your own IT department because you don't quite have that need. But for them, they realize, yes, despite wherever our business has been in the past, where we have to go now is building these chips. And they need to start figuring out the app story to a greater detail than they have in the past. It's not a secret that Amazon has kind of struggled in the app department compared to some of the other hyperscalers and some of the other large IT companies out there, like the Oracles and SAPs of the world. And Amazon brings it up regularly that they are missing, call it 85 to 90% of the IT market because they don't have the right products to be able to even compete in that space. And this is one of them. So, so Amazon knows that they need to dig more deeply into these specific areas, all the building blocks necessary to build models and apps and hardware. And then that is where their mindset and starting point is, and it builds up to everything else they do as well. Because this letter also talked about what they do from a retail perspective, from a robotics perspective, a warehousing perspective, a logistics perspective, and this all comes back to the AWS, the compute and storage capabilities that we all know and love in the IT world.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that, I mean, we're going to talk about Google in a second. If I'm a CIO
Mhm.
today, we in the past talked about Oracle, and I think they both Google and Oracle have their place, but I'm looking at this, and I land on either Microsoft, the Azure platform, or AWS, and mostly because what I think that both these companies have been phenomenal at is having a very clearly articulated vision, and they're not the same vision, right?
Mhm.
They are divergent. Um, and in Amazon's case, I think Amazon's brilliance in many cases is because they have all these other businesses, they become their own best consumer.
Mhm.
And this idea, and this is something, it goes all the way back to HP. I remember back 20 years ago, HP, what is now HPE, but HP Software at the time made a big deal where they used to trot their CIO about how they were doing all this transformation on their own. And there's a handful of companies today are doing something similar. ServiceNow has what they call now on now, and this
Mhm.
idea of how ServiceNow uses the ServiceNow platform to execute their own business. Zoho I don't know if they have a special term, but Zoho runs on Zoho, I think is what they call it, right?
Mhm.
This idea, right? And I think, Amazon is very similar, right? Amazon, in fact, their whole origin story is AWS was the architecture they built to run their business, and then realize, at least this is the lore, that they could sell this. And I think you see this manifest in all of their, whether that's retail, whether it's distribution, whether it's Whole Foods and their grocery lines and experimentations with Amazon Fresh and all of these different things where they're bringing all this technology to life. And as an enterprise customer, you can sit there and go, oh, now I can see how this actually applies.
Mhm.
And so I have a lot more faith in their ability to execute on that, despite their maybe lack of that application layer. Um, and we'll see how important that ultimately becomes. And I think that their focus on the AI layer of apps, I think, is going to be critical. So, we'll see how it plays out. But I just love their clarity and their direction.
Yes. So